to Undercover. I'm Dave Pauli, Director of the Missoula Public Library, and this is the show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. Our show is jointly sponsored by the Missoula Public Library and by Fact and Fiction Bookstore. And our guest tonight is David Cates. Welcome, David. Thanks for being our guest. And he is the author of a new novel called Hunger in America. And this is your first novel. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about how this novel came about, or how you got into writing.
Well, I studied journalism as an undergrad at the University of Montana, and I was learning how to write in journalism school, learning how to write sentences, because I didn't know how to write sentences, and they taught me how. But as I began to write news stories and also began to read fiction, I just realized that's what I wanted to do. And so as soon as I graduated from college in '79, I started to write fiction. I said, that's what I'm going to do. So that's just what I did.
And what predates the novel, or what format? Short stories? Or?
Yeah, I wrote stories for about. Well, I've been writing stories all the way through since then, but until probably the last year, I haven't worked on any stories. But I wrote just stories for about 3 years, from like '79 to '82, and then I started this novel in '82 and finished a draft in '85. In which, during those 3 years, I was just primarily working on the novel. And then I couldn't sell it, and I did revisions every now and then, but over the next number of years, I was working on stories and rewriting this, and working on stories and rewriting this. And so it's a long story, but it finally finishes with, I sold it in '90, almost 2 years ago. So from the process of starting it to the time that I sold it was 8 years, and then I did another rewrite after it sold. Minor stuff, but I thought it was important, the last stuff I did.
Now, was that rewrite based on some advice from editors, or how did that?
Yeah, I had a
work?
good editor who. What he did is he asked me questions about the book, and the book takes place all in one night, and there's a lot of little details, and the arrangement of details is small work. I didn't spend many days from the time I sold it to the time the last draft was done. I maybe spent 6 weeks, 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks at another time. But the work was was precision work. It was arranging details so that the revelation would be more dramatic, would make more sense in the story. So.
And as you said, it takes place all in one night, and it's set in Kodiak, Alaska, which probably for most of the people who are going to read this is not a place they know very much about. And why did you choose to set it there? Does that place have something special, mean something to you that?
Well, I suppose it does, but I would never want to say that I know a lot about Kodiak, Alaska. I know enough to write this book, but I didn't try to write a book about Kodiak. I worked there in 1976 loading bush planes and working in a cannery. And then I went back again in 1983 after I was working on this. I'd probably spent a year on this already, and I went back and I drove a cab, and I worked on a fishing boat. And the first time I went there in '76, I was 20 years old, and it kind of, well, I always say it knocked me on my rear end, because was my response afterward. It took me months, years. I was still trying to figure out what happened to me up there, what it was about that place that really kind of floored me, changed the way I looked at the world. Part of that also was I went to, during that 6 months period, I was in Alaska for 3 months. I went back to Wisconsin, and then I left and I went to Africa for 3 months. And when I was in Africa, I started reading novels. And those were two experiences, the Kodiak experience, then the Africa thing, plus reading. I'd never read novels before. I wasn't the same person after that time. I mean, it was, and as I wrote, there was something about Kodiak that stuck in my imagination. I mean, it's very, you know, it lends itself to drama in the sense that it's this island, and the way at least I was interpreting the universe anyway. It was all there. It was this ocean, it was these mountains, there's this little strip of land where these people lived on. It lent itself to allegory really well, and so I just stuck with it. I didn't see any reason to move my novel somewhere else or to invent a fictional place.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to hear you say that you drove a cab while you were there, because your protagonist, Jack Dempsey Cliff, is also a cab driver. And again, it was a little incongruous to me. I mean, I think of cab drivers in Chicago or New York City, but I don't think of them in Alaska. But that was his profession while he was there.
I love the idea of writing an urban Alaska book. I mean, it was kind of like my experience in Alaska, which hasn't been that broad. I've worked up there for 3 times for 2 months, twice in Kodiak, once up in Fairbanks. And my experience with the state has been really a relatively urban experience. I've never lived in the villages, and most of the people who live in Alaska, a vast percentage of them, live in the cities. They don't live in the villages. And so that although it has this reputation of being this wild state, it is wild in the sense it's not paved. There's the experience of being there is not that different than being in Chicago or being in Missoula, in cities.
Right.
So,
well, your main character, Jack Cliff, has gone there for reasons that reveal themselves a little slowly as you go through the book. But mainly, he's kind of searching for a father who went there. And I guess maybe he's searching for something else. What do you see him as searching for when he's
the meaning of life?
Yeah.
You know, that's ultimately what he's doing. I think he's searching for his father, but he's also trying to figure out if it's possible for him to be happy, if he ever has been happy, what happiness is, what love is. Why we don't feel good all the time when we think we should. So it's a big search, you know, in a skinny book, and I think that searching for a father is a old. It's an old story. Even those of us who knew our fathers, we still wonder. We want to know. We want to know them better. We never know exactly who they are, and so he doesn't ever learn that much about his dad during the course of the book.
Little pieces here and there.
Yeah, because ultimately I think the story of any of our lives is living with the mystery of not knowing, and how do we live with that? How do we make sense of partial knowledge? And that's a lot what's going on with Jack, I think, in this book.
And what about some of the other people? One thing I noticed is that they had not only a name, but they had a place attached to their name, like the waitress from Moscow, Idaho, and somebody else from Great Falls. And
there's Londa Evans from Little Rock, Arkansas,
right.
Johnny Johnson from Billings, Montana.
Right.
Well, I did that because that's another thing that you see in Alaska, but I also think you see it all over this country. We live in a transient. The whole history of this country has been transients, and so, what's your name and where are you from? Those are the questions. That's the way we define ourselves often, especially in a new place. So I just lay those on as tags on the characters, partially because it was practical. I mean, there's a lot of characters in this book, and I have to keep reminding the reader who these people are, and partly because these are, in some sense, the most important attributes to to their personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and they may have been there searching for something too. I had the feeling that there was some common thread running through everybody's reasons for coming to
mm-hmm.
Kodiak.
Yeah, well, I thought, see, it's not very subtle. Kodiak wasn't a subtle place, and I hope now, as a older person, I can set a novel in a less subtle, in more of a subtle place. But Kodiak is not subtle, and I didn't. It was very dramatic. People came and go there for a reason, which isn't necessarily the truth, but they're exposed. They go up there. They're a long way from home. They don't know. They don't know what's going to happen. They have their hearts on their sleeves, or if not their hearts, their glands on their sleeves, and they are up there for. They're very exposed. They're away from everything that would have protected them before. So, this is a book about restlessness and searching, which I think is the American experience. I mean, this whole. If you read about the West or the Midwest or New York, it just depends on how far back you go, and you look at census figures for little towns. Little town in New York. I remember my wife was reading during the decade of 1860 to 1870. Only like 20% of the people that were there at the beginning of the decade were there at the end of the decade. This whole country has been made up of transient population, and so it's very visible in Alaska now.
It seemed like there was Jack. Originally came there from Wisconsin. It seemed like the contrast kept as his memories of Wisconsin would flash onto his mind, that there was a contrast there.
Mm-hmm.
I kept thinking that, in fact, you even referred to at one point, you said that the farm he came from was almost like a womb to him, mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. that somehow the contrast of that safety and security compared to what was there in mm-hmm. Alaska was pretty startling to me.
Yeah, I think that's part of that may be part of the restlessness that is going to drive the guy who's born in Alaska somewhere else, if he's American. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that is, but my great-grandfather lived in the ocean, and he was a seaman off the coast of Maine, and my grandfather was born in Maine, and he moved to New York, and my father was born in New York, and he moved to Wisconsin, and I live in Montana. And that is a common American story. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why we have that in us, but it seems to be there. And so
yeah,
I don't know what it means any more than anybody else, but that's a lot of the characters in here have that same.
There were two characters who never appeared as actual people in the book outside of what other people thought about them. And one was Jack's father, of course, who died before Jack even got up there. And the other one was Mary, his girlfriend, back in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. But it seemed to me like they were real vivid people because they were alive in the memories well, especially Mary, but Jack's father too. He was mm-hmm. alive in the memories of the other people. Was that an intentional thing to create them wholly out of other people's memories?
Well, part of what this book. How many times have I said what this book is about during this conversation? I don't know, but part of what it is about is the way that we are kind of we are prisoners of the moment. We're prisoners of the here and now and the little space we're sitting and mm-hmm. and but the way that we the way the way we keep that from being unbearable is memory and imagination, and our minds are full of ghosts. At the very beginning of this, I think I say Kodiak is an island of 10,000 gray shades. I mean ghosts there as much as anything else. That this is what we live with. This is what keeps us sane. Our memories of people who aren't around us often, mm-hmm. especially if we're a long way away from home.
And Jack not only has these memories, but he also has this facility for imagining a future with somebody, maybe even a complete stranger on an airplane sometimes. And I found that pretty interesting. An elaborate future once in a while.
Yeah, I know Jack is kind of a spacey guy. I think sometimes he does have an imagination. That's the only way that I think that you can write a book, that 2/3 of which takes place inside of a taxi cab. Is the guy better have an imagination. He better be interesting, otherwise, well, I would get pretty bored writing it. I mean, you know, then the door closed.
What about? I guess I was thinking about hunger. The title "Hunger in America," and there is actual physical hunger described here. Jack keeps wanting to eat, and then he gets another call to go out and pick somebody else up, and then these two guys eat his food at one point that he has sitting in the taxi while he's out doing something else. And so there is actual description of physical hunger, but it's more than just I mean, that's obviously some kind of a metaphor. I was struggling a little bit with that to figure out what that was. What do you think that was?
Well, I saw it. I see the primary metaphor is spiritual hunger. I think these people, we all are looking for what our life means. What is our life about? That's the question every human being asks himself. A dog doesn't ask himself that, right? But a person does. Why am I here? Why do I go to work? Why do I wake up? And that's these people who are, for the most part, a long way away from their easy answers to those questions. And so those questions weigh more heavily on them than we may be able to skate through days without thinking about it very much. But because of the circumstances these characters are in, that question weighs a little bit more heavily on them. But the title partly comes from I was kind of very into the book and what was going on in it, and in the early 80s, and I remember seeing this or hearing this report about Robert McNamara's report on hunger in America. It was a what's the word? It was a documentation of actual hunger in America, and I remember thinking that I just had this kind of anger, and I think oftentimes books and stories come from anger or some strong feeling like that, which you don't know what else to do with, so you write a book. Right? I remember thinking we are so, as a culture, so obsessed with numerically documenting things, and that we don't even see. You know, that's what I was thinking at the time. We don't even see how it is we are really hungry. How is it that Americans are really hungry? How is it that where is the real hunger? And so I started to see that that's what I was writing about. And so I thought, name it that. That's what it's about.
So it's a spiritual quest and a spiritual hunger.
Yes, I think so. But anybody can say that, I think there's a lot of different hungers in there, and whichever one, I mean, ultimately the reader figures out what it's about. But my idea was this, as much spirituality as anything else, and I don't know the answers that way any more than anybody else does, but I can see a certain vacuum when I...
Well, what about, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Jack's father, who was a boxer named Kid Cliff, and who was a veteran who had evidently survived the Bataan death march in the Philippines during the war. He came back from the war and was only in his farm for a short time, and then left for Kodiak. And I was trying to understand that guy, I guess just the way Jack was, by the bits and pieces that I got. And, did you know anything about did you create that Bataan Death March background for him based on some of your own reading about it, or was that of interest to you?
Well, you know, sometimes when you write, you just phrases. You just write phrases. You know, so and so. You know, you don't necessarily plan it, and so I tagged Kid Cliff with that past, with the past of being a prisoner of war. I didn't know very much about Bataan at all, and I just tagged that in a first draft of some reference to him. Mm-hmm. But the way it works usually, with me anyway, in writing is, then I look at, you know, you look back and you go, which one, some of these details, some of these things you write through on a draft are actually intriguing. And you say, yeah, that's right, that's what he was. He was a Japanese prisoner. That explains something to me. And then I started doing some reading. And I read a lot of accounts of these guys and what they went through. Mm-hmm. So it kind of started out as just a side comment, and then I did a little bit of research as far as what actual prisoners had to endure, and what it and how, and then I tried to imagine what it would make a person, mm-hmm. what it would make this guy feel like, and because, you know, I'm not a sociologist, I don't know what it makes a person, but I can say what it does to my character.
Yeah, you know, it was very believable, I thought. I just wondered why this novel almost seems to me like you wrote it with the classical unities in mind, almost, you know, like the action taking place over just a short, maybe 24-hour or less period, and that was obviously intentional. Was that, what's the reason for that technique?
I don't know what the reason is. You know, you once again, I write scenes, and in the scenes the characters begin to develop themselves. And after a few years, I began to realize that this was all one night. Mm-hmm. I didn't start out thinking that. I started out trying to understand these kind of mysterious characters, which to me were intriguing.
So the characters came, I mean, the setting and everything else is incidental to what development of the characters.
Yes, with me it's always, you know, it's a dialogue. It's a room with people talking. It's somebody lying to somebody else, and I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't know how it fits into any big story, and that's what I did for a few years actually before. Well, I think actually once I went back to Kodiak and I started to drive a cab, and I'd been working on the book for about a year, I began to see that cab as a great kind of vehicle for all these characters that I'd been inventing. And so it kind of was serendipitous. Also, the whole Jack Dempsey thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that I didn't plan that Jack Dempsey was going to die on May 31st, 1983, but he did. And suddenly I thought, that's what my character's name is. I didn't even know that was my character's name until I heard that Jack Dempsey died. So
I need to ask you a question I ask fairly often, and that is, how do you respond to reviews? Have you read many reviews in any of the literature?
Well, the very first review I got was from Kirkus. It's the Kirkus Review and Publishers Weekly come out before the book is published. And
right.
So I get this letter from my publisher in the mail, just an envelope, and I open it up, and it's a Kirkus review, a copy of the Kirkus Review, and it was horrible. It was just horrible. It was like, I just read it, and I felt like, well, I felt sick to my stomach. I thought, I felt like I'd just kind of like done this tap dance with a tutu on in front of some people, and then they didn't clap, you know, they just they sneered, and then I felt just, it was horrible. I just threw it away, but then about 3 days later I got a really wonderful review from Publishers Weekly.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, that's how this works. Yeah. Some guys hate it, some guys don't.
I guess.
And then since then it's been more, I've had this more of a feeling like somebody, if I read a review that's positive, I think sometimes it's real interesting to see what the person sees in the book.
Yeah.
And working on the book as long as I did, there hasn't been anything written that I haven't thought about already.
Wow.
That I haven't, I saw that. I thought about that. So far, there hasn't been a lot written about it, so it's been real pleasing. There's been a lot of good reviews since.
There have been. Yeah. Great. Well, I want to thank you for being our guest. The name of the book again is Hunger in America, and the author is David Cates. And thanks again for sharing your thoughts about your book. I want to take a couple of minutes to run down a few things about the library. We'll be starting up, we've had a real successful summer, and we'll be starting up our fall programs in late September for preschoolers, so keep in touch with us about that. I want to make a plug for our book discussion group. As I was reading this book, it seemed to me this would be a great one for our discussion group. We have a book discussion group that meets once a month at the library, the third Thursday, and you can call us at 721-2665 if you might be interested in joining that group. We have room for some more people, and we'd like to have a few more people involved in that. Again, want to remind people that our hours are 60 hours a week. We're open Monday through Saturday all year round, and 4 evenings and every Saturday. And just to finish up my little promo tonight, I did want to mention also our Book Babies program, which is a special program we have for parents and toddlers once a month on the first Wednesday of the month. And finally, I want to finish up my library plugs tonight with some statistics, if I may, very briefly. I just want to let people know that during the past year, we count our year from July 1st to June 30th, and we just compiled all the statistics for that year. And we checked out 490,582 items during the year, which is an all-time record for the Missoula Public Library. We've been really busy, and I want to thank the community for all the support we've gotten. And one way to think about that, if you want to think about it in that way, is that if you had to go out and buy 490,000 items, books, videos, tapes, magazines, all the things that we deal with every day, at an approximate cost of $20 a shot, you'd be paying over $9 million, almost $10 million for that kind of material. And we're offering that service for less than $600,000 of your tax money. So we think it's a pretty good deal. I want to thank all the people who helped make this show possible, people behind the camera, Karen Reard and Cal DeBryan and Betty Ammon, who's our producer, and especially Barbara Thoreau from Fact and Fiction Bookstore, who finds us these wonderful authors. And thanks for being with us tonight. And again, thanks, David Cates.
Oh, you're welcome.
Da da da.